Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Investor Lab, the auditory epicenter for passionate people seeking a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. And joining me on today's episode was a very unique individual. His name is Henry Vila, and he is the managing director of a company called Stone Horizon. Now, not only did we talk about his personal journey from Venezuela to Australia, how he managed to break free from the shackles of wage slavery in his corporate job, but also his 5-year property entrepreneurship journey, which has led him to start development companies and a whole range of different things. He's got an extremely inspiring story that's happened over a very short period of time. And we talk about how he managed to do that, levels of self-belief. We talked about the power of education and the 3 key areas of growth that he focuses on, which is personal, business, and property. We also spoke about his appearance at Tony Robbins' Business Mastery event and his interaction with Sarah Blakely, which is really interesting too. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So there's so much really to unpack here. It wasn't just a story about Henry though. It was also an insight into rooming houses and how they can fit into a dynamic portfolio. So we spoke about why rooming houses are good. Also, what are the risks in rooming houses? And why would you choose rooming houses over a commercial asset? And a whole variety of different things. Now, this episode is going to be best suited to, really, it's very interesting. This is going to be best suited to anyone who needs just to spark that entrepreneurial spirit, who is ready for change, and they just need to get some fuel in that fire to get them to break free and to become the master of their own destiny. And it's also going to be super exciting for advanced stage investors, because rooming houses are not something you can inject in your portfolio early on. There's something that has to come in a later stage. That's where it's a legacy stage asset. If you're familiar with our strategies, you'll understand that it's the 3rd stage in your investing portfolio. It's a wonderful strategy that is extremely high cash flow whilst also having the benefits of residential and manufacturing growth. However, it's not for the faint of heart, and there are a lot of risks associated with it. So I think this is going to be super insightful for, as I say, anyone who's starting their entrepreneurial journey, or someone who's already an advanced stage investor, or someone on their journey who wants to see a little bit into the future about where they can go on their property journey. This is going to be super valuable. I got a lot out of this. I was actually pumped. If you're watching the video for this episode, you'll see me pumping my fists in the air and everything. I had such a good time talking to Henry, not just because I like his strategies and because I think that they can help people, but because there is a huge alignment in the way that his vision of the future is for other people. And we're both really committed to helping people achieve more freedom, choice, and abundance in their life. So it's great to really spend some time with someone who's so aligned with that vision as well. And I just know that you're going to get a lot out of it. If you've listened to this podcast before, you'll understand the kind of values that we have and where we want people to go. And this is so aligned with that. Now, if you like this episode, there's an added bonus. Not just do you get to enjoy this fantastic episode, but Henry has also offered for our private membership clients. So if you want to work out how to join that, just head to theinvestorlab.com.au/join the community. We're going to be hosting a training. Henry is going to crack open the can and really tell you everything you need to know about rooming houses, how it works, the mechanics, the finances, where it fits, how it fits, what are the the risks, the benefits, all of that stuff. And we're going to go into a deep dive training so you can really understand not just the what, but also the how. And that is only going to be exclusively available inside our private community. So if you're interested in participating that is going to be happening over the coming months. We've got so much stuff planned in there that I highly suggest and highly encourage you, if you really do want to start advancing your property journey, to join that community now. Just head to theinvestorlab.com.au/join the community. And if you just go to theinvestorlab.com.au, you'll find a multitude of other ways that we can help you too. We've obviously got the podcast. We've got my book. If you're interested in that, head to renegadespropertybook.com. And also, we've got our buyer's agency service. So there are so many different ways that we're trying to meet you where you are to get you to where you want to go. So jump on that website. That's theinvestorlab.com.au to find out the many, many ways that we can help you. And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you've enjoyed other podcasts, and if also you enjoy other people, then I encourage you to join those dots and share this podcast with those other people so that they can get some benefit out of it as well. And of course, like, share, comment, rate, review, do all of the good stuff, because the interaction that you give back to us really gives us fuel for what we need to be able to give you what you need. And if you have any suggestions or any questions, feel free to send them in. You can reach out to us via the website and let us know what you want more of so that we can help you get to where you want to go. I know you're going to love this episode. Enjoy. I'll see you on the inside. Hello and welcome. Joining me on today's episode of the Investor Lab is a very special guest. You might have noticed, if you've been listening to the podcast recently, you'll notice a couple of things have changed. Firstly, we're doing more episodes. And the reason we're doing more episodes is because we want to bring more value. And part of that bringing value is us reaching out to other experienced professionals in the field, people who have got paradigm shifting ideas, unique philosophies, helpful strategies that are able to, bring more value to your property journey and, help us serve our mission of empowering Australia's property investors. And so it is with my great pleasure that I would like to welcome today's guest, Henry Vila.
Thank you, Gus. Pleasure to be here.
Mate, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on board. So let me just give a little bit of backstory. So we've actually known each other kind of like loosely for 2 years or something now.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, quite a bit.
Yeah, we met at a business club. We've sort of been in and around, the same industry. We've been connected in a few different ways. And recently we reconnected and we got stuck on to talking about what you're focusing on right now in a big way, as far as I understand, is about rooming houses, right? Or do you call them rooming houses, boarding houses? What's the differentiation?
Listen, it's a bit of semantics. So depending on which state you are in, it works a little bit different. I like calling them rooming houses because we try to build a very specific product that I'm pretty sure we're going to talk a little bit about.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome, man. Sweet. Well, mate. So let's take a little step back because we can talk about rooming houses and boarding houses. We'll talk about all that. We'll get into the mechanics of that kind of property strategy aspect in a bit. I'm very interested though, and to take a little backtrack and to find out a little bit more about your story. I think it'll be beneficial to people to understand it. I'm pretty confident you've got a very interesting story and I actually don't know it. So I'm interested to find out myself. So you're currently now the managing director of a development company called Stone Horizon. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Awesome. So I'm guessing by your accent, you weren't born in Australia and that's cool. No. So tell me, how did you get from Venezuela, as I understand it? How'd you get from Venezuela to here to building rooming houses? What does that story look like?
Yeah, it's long. I'm not sure it's an interesting story, but I guess it's my story. It's the only one I can share. So, born in Venezuela, at the edge of the Caribbean, in a beautiful place called Venezuela, that is beautiful geographically, but not necessarily politically or economically.
Sorry to interject there, but it's the big thing about Venezuela is they printed all the money and they had hyperinflation, right?
We did, yeah.
Were you there during that period of time?
I left at the beginning of that whole process, but it was very clear that the economy was in bad shape, and that the people in charge of managing the economy, they weren't doing anything to kind of solve it. So many of us who had options to go to other places took that opportunity.
So that was why you left. You were like, okay, this country's going to the pits.
It is, yes. I spent probably before finally leaving, I spent quite a bit of time in the United States. So I have family over there, particularly in Florida, New York, and places like that. But around 2004, where I decided I had enough of Venezuela and we were going to kind of move somewhere else. The natural place for me was going to go to the United States, where, like I said, I had family and relationships and everything like that. But in 2004, the economy of the United States was in pretty bad shape still, coming back from 9/11 and from the crash that followed. So we decided to take a bit of a detour and to come to this tiny little island with 25 million people called Australia, to get a little bit of exposure to this part of the world and maybe get a little bit closer to Asia for what we thought was going to be a year, max 2. And then go back to the United States, and here you have me, 16 years later. I do have an accent because I wasn't born here, but other than that, my blood is as Australian as it gets, man.
Awesome, man. Awesome. So that's awesome. what prompted you, like you said that you wanted to get a little taste and be closer to Asia. Like what was that what was the thinking around that?
Well, listen, at the time I spent 25 years in the corporate world until I kind of transitioned into property, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in the career I had, global exposure was fairly important. So again, getting exposure to this part of the world was going to give me a lot of power, was going to allow me to compete in the American market, which is obviously fairly competitive in general, a fairly competitive economy. So yeah, the intention was to come here, try something different, live in a different culture, a different place, and then go back to what seemed very obvious. But again, once I got here, I fell in love with the place. I managed to continue that corporate career that I've been doing for a while. And just fell in love with the place, fell in love with the people, and fell in love with the opportunities that we have in this economy.
Yeah, fair enough. As someone who's traveled a lot myself, like I've lived overseas for 10 years, I actually didn't spend longer than 6 months in Australia at any given point in time. I was on the road constantly. But I certainly come to really, really, really love the opportunity and the culture. Like I used to sort of try and run away from it and want to experience the world. And now I'm like, actually, this place is great. It's fantastic. Yeah. So you kind of mentioned there, obviously you're a developer now, but you haven't always been a developer. So what was this kind of like, was what you were doing previously? How did that tie in with this? Before you left Venezuela, were you doing property stuff? Tell me a little bit about your property journey and how that tied in with what you were doing.
Listen, I've always had an interest in property, but it's always been a little bit ancillary. So I was a corporate guy for 25 years. I worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, car manufacturers and banks and consulting firms and technology companies. But about 5 years ago, I had a kind of big kind of wake up call. So I had twin 7-year-old twin boys. So there were about 1 or 2 at the time, and I realized that I was kind of missing a lot of time with them. I was spending 220 nights away from home, all throughout Australia and overseas. So what was really glamorous and exciting when I was in my 20s, I realized it just wasn't sustainable. So I needed to look for something that will give me the freedom from what I now call corporate slavery. So back then I was, in hindsight, I was a slave, but I didn't quite realize it. I was a highly paid slave, and like I said, lots of travel, lots of nice things. But I wasn't the owner of my own destiny, the owner of my own time. So I decided to change that, and then I very, very quickly realized that property was a way to kind of achieve that. So like I said, I've always had an interest in property. I'm an engineer by training, so I decided to put those skills to kind of good use. I was lucky enough to have good mentors and good teachers around me that gone through that journey before. And I started out heading into property with a view that, make that transition as quickly as I could.
Okay. So you were in corporate life for a long time. You're in engineering. You work for some big companies. You spend all your time on the road. You had a young family here in Australia, and then you were like, something's got to change. I can't spend all my time away. I need to be here for my family and all of that kind of stuff. That was only 5 years ago?
Yeah, about 5 years ago, I started that process, yes.
Wow. Okay. So, and you'd been a property investor prior, right?
Yeah, that's right. I've been investing in property. I've been, owning and investing in property, most of my life, really. But what I call the wrong way or the traditional way. I had my first property in Australia. It was going to be now 13 years ago. I've been doing what most investors do. Buy a property, rent it for less than I needed to pay the bank, pay my tenants to live in my house, and not making any money on the process.
Yeah,
I just didn't know any different, right?
Classic negative gearing trap, right?
Absolutely. So, and again, back then, that's what everyone was doing. So I kind of felt like, that's the way you do it in this country. And again, as part of adopting I guess, my new Australian life, it felt natural to do what everyone else was doing.
You adopted the new Australian life and the new Australian liabilities as well.
That's right. Yeah. I adopted the good and the bad. Lucky enough, I woke up to that one not long after that. So.
Yeah, good. So, did you that transition that you decided you were going to right, I'm ditching corporate life and I'm going to I'm going to be the master of my own destiny. I understand your motivation, family, but what did that transition look and feel like? Do you consider yourself to be an entrepreneur, or have you just how do you kind of see that transition from who you were to who you are now?
Yeah, certainly, my corporate career was built on building and transforming businesses, other people's businesses. So part of what I decided to do is, if I can do it for other people, there's no reason why, I shouldn't do it for myself. Property was going to be the vehicle, and then it was a matter of establishing the right structure and the right strategies around me to be able to do that. So as a consequence of that, I now, I call myself a property entrepreneur. I have a number of businesses in property. Obviously, Stone Horizon being the main one, and rooming houses being my favorite cash flow strategy, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that.
We'll talk about that for sure, yeah.
But that's not necessarily where it started. I started doing other stuff. I started doing, developments, and I own a building company, and I own some other property businesses around it.
Essentially, though, you started from scratch. You left corporate life 5 years ago, and then now you own multiple businesses in the property space. You own a building company, you do rooming houses, you've done development. Fascinated, that by any measure, that is an exceptional achievement. You mentioned something there that you consider yourself a property entrepreneur. One of my passions is awakening the entrepreneurial spirit inside real estate investors. There's a difference between the classic property investor who's just I'm happy to work until I'm 50 or 60 and I'll just segment some of my wage into property and I'll just park it over there and I'll deal with it later. Classic sort of property investor. And then there's the people who really want to go out and capture their own destiny and they want to use real estate as a vehicle. And you're a classic embodiment of that. And so, mate, I want to thank you for sharing that and for being part of this, because it's really going to help other people to see that they can do it too. What was the hardest part about transitioning from, I guess, the stability of having a job and starting your own business in this space?
Well, listen, the biggest challenge and the biggest barrier on all of this process, not only for me, but also for some of the people that I've seen go through the same journey after me, it's kind of twofold. The first one is there's a big sort of self-belief factor that is needed to be able to kind of overcome all the challenges that are going to go, with the journey, right? So you're starting with nothing. I didn't know much about property. I certainly didn't know much about building. And some of these strategies that today are fairly common for us and that are fairly industrialized and that we kind of deliver for some of our clients, back then, there wasn't a Stone Horizon that could do some of these developments and some of these kind of strategies for me, which is why we ended up building all of that. So in a way, we were kind of creating the path, and that required a little bit of trust that this was the right thing to do. The other big thing is it changed a lot the way I perceive risk. Yeah, one of the reasons why I stay in corporate life for so long is because I used to believe that was the lower risk path. Yeah, that going on my own meant that where I didn't have a guaranteed salary, that I didn't have the surety of having a system around me and a team around me. Particularly at the beginning when I was kind of just myself. And then very quickly I realized that I had it all wrong, that effectively was exactly the opposite. That by being, my own boss and the leader of my own journey, I had a lot more control than I did in the corporate world. It's not necessarily that's without risk. There's obviously risk in everything, every investment journey has risks attached to it. But what I used to think was fairly safe it turned out to not be safe at all. And I think, we've seen plenty of recent cases where a lot of the companies that I used to work for kind of laid out significant amounts of people, overnight. So, people thought they were safe, but in reality, they weren't. They just didn't have the visibility of what was about to happen.
Yeah, it's the delegation of responsibility, and that's a massive thing. A lot of people go, "Oh, it's safe and secure," only because I'm refusing to take responsibility for myself. It's like, well, I don't need to worry about that because I'm suckling on the bosom of somebody else's decision-making process, which is totally fine. But I remember like my dad and my granddad, they both worked for the State Electrical Commission, SEC, in Victoria. And both of them, when they started their jobs, had jobs for life. That was the thing. It was a job for life. Like you go there and you work for like that was it. So that was like security. It was unheard of. What do you mean? You wouldn't get retrenched. What are you talking about? But everything's completely changed, and particularly in the way that the economy moves and everything moves. I think it's scary. There's a lot of fear that comes with taking responsibility for yourself. And that's a level of fear that most people associate with negativity. They're like, oh, it's scary and it's risky. But it's like, well, I would rather control my risk and face up to that fear. I would rather stare that fair and square in the face and say, I can see you, I know you, and I will own you, rather than just pretending like there is no risk and hoping somebody else is going to take care of me.
Absolutely. And that was the key. So, there was a point in my journey where I was ready to kind of complete the transition. And then, I realized that I had my next year of salary already in the bank. And I'm like, well, worst case scenario, if this fails, I have a year to find another job. So that's a pretty comfortable place to be in terms of, knowing that I had the abilities and the skills and some experience. I'm like, and I already know exactly what was going to happen in the following year. I was going to make, the same amount of money I was making before with, absolutely no risk. So my risk was on year 2 or year 3. That's something that very, very few people get to experience. Now, today, very different story. Today I know what's going to happen in the next 5 years. So my biggest risk is to not grow, not to kind of shrink. And like I said, I know exactly what's going to happen in the next year or two. Kind of almost down to the dollar. So
a lot of business owners don't have that foresight. Now, and I just want to loop back a little bit, because starting this journey, you mentioned self-belief. Yeah. You also mentioned that you didn't really know much about building. You didn't really know that much about property. That must have taken, sure, you had the cushion, the financial cushion. All right, I've got a year to give it a crack, but that takes a hell of a lot of self-belief. And to be able to have that foresight into your business trajectory over the next 5 years is also, for a lot of people, it's not common. A lot of people don't operate their businesses that way. Now, a slight segue to this is, a little while ago, I was listening to a podcast, a Tony Robbins podcast, and it was at the Business Mastery event. I want to just kind of touch on that. I heard there was a question that that you asked, and it got asked of Sarah Blakely. I can't remember the question. You might be able to remember the question, but I was like, "That's Henry. I know Henry. Fantastic." And I'm wondering how much has Tony Robbins, Business Mastery, like how much is having those kind of mentors and programs and guides and professionals, and how much has that helped or dictated or contributed to your success so far?
Oh, listen, immensely. It's one of the things that has led me to be able to achieve the things that I've achieved in this relatively sort of modest period of time has been to surround myself with people who've done it before, with the right team, with the right expertise, the people who have, the knowledge and the experience that I didn't have when I started. So, a very, very good example in the case of that conference. I go to probably one big international conference every year, and probably to 3 or 4 smaller local ones, because it doesn't matter how much I've done or what I've achieved. The biggest portion is still ahead of me, right? I still need to develop. I still need to learn. I still need to kind of mature as a leader and as an entrepreneur, and I need to bring kind of new ideas, new approaches to my business. So in January, I had the opportunity to kind of have a chat to Sarah Blakely. I've heard her before in a different conference, and this time around, the way she told her story was about, she's the owner of Spanx, one of the kind of big kind of entrepreneur success stories of probably the last 20, 30 years. And she did everything without taking a single investment dollar. A single dollar from anyone else. She did all herself. And I saw myself in a very similar journey. I am in a similar journey in the sense that I'm not in a kind of technology startup or the typical kind of startup scene that many entrepreneurs are. I'm driving a business on my own, and I have intention of continue to growing it. And she grew it really, really big with no money. So my question to her was, well, how do you grow a company to that size without taking any money from anyone? And I think the question caught her by surprise a little bit. So she actually kind of asked the question and then kind of try to mix with the crowd. And I don't necessarily like being the center of attention, and I certainly wouldn't pretend to be, anywhere near where those guys are. But she kind of looked me up. She said, "Oh, okay, where's Henry? I want to see who's kind of asking the question." And then she proceeded to tell me a very, very simple but super powerful truth, which is, there's no black magic in business. There's no black magic in any of the stuff that we do as property entrepreneurs. And she didn't quite say it, but she helped me, understand that in property is the same thing. So property, for the most of it, is relatively simple business. You just need to know kind of what you're doing, have the right people around you, the right team around you, get the right help, because it is a team sport. And sometimes you need to kind of stop looking, where the kind of secret that's going to make me rich overnight is, and just realize that it's a progressive process. And that's kind of part of what I've done with it.
Totally. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned in my life, and I'll be honest and say that I've only really been learning it fairly recently, is that fast is bad. Like fast is not the goal. Like fast generally means there's something wrong. Like, and I was listening to Simon Sinek, an interview with Simon Sinek a couple of weeks ago. And he said something to that effect. He was like, I don't understand this obsession with everyone trying to like hyper growth companies and get rich really fast. He said, like, think about it this way. If you suddenly said to someone, hey man, I've put on 20 kilograms of muscle in the last week, look at me. You'd be like, is that healthy? That doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like it should be the goal, right? And in fact, the greatest gains are going to be actually made incrementally, consistently over time. Like consistency trumps speed every single time.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to get into property in a second. I just want to ask you, from a personal level, given where you're at right now, and given that you constantly have a desire to, my partner Gabby and I, we always, ABL is our thing, always be learning, right? And what do you try and learn the most right now? As you say, you're always learning. Are you trying to find new property strategies, or are you like, cool, I've got the property bit fine, I just need to focus on business? Or how do you segment that? Or is there any kind of, tell me about that.
Listen, there's three big sort of areas that drive my learning journey, right? So I like you, believe that learning has been probably the main factor that has taken me from where I was to where I am now. And it's going to be the key factor to take me from where I am to where I'm going to be in the next 10 or 20 years. Yeah. So, and I've been trying to learn, and now sort of have a bit of an approach. So I have sort of three-pronged approach to kind of learning. There's some learning that is purely personal. It's about understanding myself better, understanding my strengths, understanding my leadership styles, the way I relate to people. Yeah. The way, my emotions work and how to better control them and how to kind of drive faster and challenge myself. Right. So that's one factor. Some of the Tony Robbins stuff that you've seen me do kind of falls in there. Some of the stuff that I've done locally with other people. And sometimes it's not about property. Sometimes it's not even about business. Sometimes it's about, taking a week off and going to far north Queensland and living off the grid, we no contact to anyone for a while, and seeing meditating and that sort of thing. So that's one factor. The second factor is about business, because very early I realized that even though I am mainly a property investor and a property entrepreneur, the rules of business apply to anything and anywhere. So I try to learn from business outside of property. So I go and talk to people who work in manufacturing. I try to talk to people who work in digital marketing. I try to go and talk to people who have, medical practices and hospitals and car dealers and all sorts of things, because there's always something that I can take out of what they do and how they do it that they take for granted, because in that industry is kind of a baseline. But if we take that and apply it to what we do in property, we can create a massive difference to the people we work with. And then the third factor, which is kind of more traditional, it's all about property. But it's not just about the basics of property. It's about how we challenge the status quo, how we challenge the assumptions of property investment to achieve the results that really, really matter. Yeah. So, and again, probably pretty good segue. That's actually what took me to kind of rooming houses is, well, how do we make sure that property can be a sustainable source of income, particularly for people who don't want to do what I do, people who don't want to transition into property, right? So we do a lot of work with, doctors and lawyers and engineers who they love what they do. They just wish they could, maybe have a little bit of extra cash, or maybe do it a little bit less often, or maybe not necessarily have the pressure of having to do it for money, being able to go and volunteer and work on occupations and stuff that really interests them, it really fulfills them, but that maybe they cannot do because they need money to live and they need to pay the mortgage. So,
Henry, I had no idea when we started this interview that you were going to get me so pumped up. Like I'm loving this, because what you've spoken about there, those three key areas and those thought processes around that are so deeply aligned with everything that we stand for: personal growth, business growth, and property and innovation in thought, innovation in thinking. And how can we change the paradigms, and how can we move things forward? How can we make a difference and make an impact? So it is a good segue for us to start really digging into some of the property stuff, because yes, I agree, rooming houses are a great strategy for a certain person at a certain point in a portfolio. And it's not for everyone. It's not a starter strategy. Absolutely. So how did you go from like, all right, I'm going to start a property entrepreneurship journey. I'm going to start in my business. You didn't start with rooming houses, right?
No, I didn't. So I didn't, and probably no one should, to be honest, because it is an advanced strategy, and it's I don't want to call it a risky strategy, but it's like driving a sports car versus taking the bus. Yeah, taking the bus is really low risk. It's very, very, other than taking the wrong bus, it's very little that can go wrong. Now, driving a high performance car, it's not problematic if you know what you're doing, right? It's and rooming houses are a bit like that. So rooming houses have a lot more complexity to them. The price and the cost of getting it wrong, it's much bigger than in other forms of property. It's probably one of the few properties where you can go to jail if you do something wrong. Not that I'm saying I don't want to kind of scare people. So. But there's a lot more regulation than there is in other forms of property, where you just kind of buy a house, rent it to someone, have a good contract, and then forget about it. In real estate, in rooming houses, the regulations are key. And I've seen plenty of people do it the wrong way, and say, oh, I'm going to buy this house, and then I'm going to rent it by the room, so I have 5 rents instead of 1. Or if you then don't do it properly, like I said, they get into big trouble. And a few years ago, there were some unfortunate news of some of these things catching fire and people losing their lives, and wow. I don't know if people ended up going to jail, but they certainly should have gone to jail, because they're at least partly responsible for what happened there. So it's very, very important, this strategy, to know what you're doing, to again, be surrounded by the right people, follow the regulations. So with all of that complexity, it's probably not something that you will do first off.
No, totally. I think just to touch on that, anyone who's familiar with us and our kind of strategies, we've got a couple of key paradigms that we encourage people to understand. Firstly, it's the 3 pillars, which are the Holy Trinity strategy. So that's cash flow positive properties, growth, so either manufactured or high growth areas, and value add potential, right? So you want to get all 3 of those factors. So you get growth, cash flow, and the ability to make your own destiny with it. Now, the other part of that is really understanding what we call the apex progression, because it's very easy because you can apply those principles to any part of the journey. But if you get the part of the journey in the wrong spot, the whole thing can break. Your whole ambition to achieve more freedom, choice, abundance, whatever that is in your life, can just absolutely disappear. So what we talk to people about is following foundation, which is typically, $200,000 to $500,000 properties, which are cash flow positive, easy to rent, maybe a little cosmetic renovation, but it's sort of like it's, really just building that growth base. So you've got an equity position. Second to that is the acceleration phase, which is maybe stuff like subdivisions, maybe battle axe, like a retain and build, or maybe a granny flat strategy, something along those lines. But it's where you're sort of taking that next level of financial and emotional complexity. You need a certain level. It's not just money. It's emotional fortitude and experience. Then the third phase is what we call the legacy phase, which is, I think, where this fits. And this is where I've always said it fits. This is with unit blocks, commercials, boarding houses, rooming houses, however we want to phrase that. They're sitting in a different category. And you've really got to make sure you've worked up to that. Otherwise, if you haven't done your stretches on the way up, you're probably going to pull a muscle when you get there, right? So tell me how that journey went for you. Like, how did you get to that point? Like, we don't need to go through every property you ever bought, every property you ever built, but like, what was the process or the thinking process? Like, how did you move from like, all right, I'm just going to go maybe build some houses to like, actually, I'm going to build rooming houses and that's going to be my thing?
Yeah, listen, I started, much like you said, buying a little 200 grand unit in a little country town in Victoria, that was sort of neutral to kind of positively gear. It's actually a shame I don't have that property anymore, but sometimes you need to kind of make decisions. But that's kind of where I started. And then very, very quickly, I moved to what you're calling your kind of middle phase or middle stage, and started doing property developments, which is probably about 40% of what I do today. It's kind of around that factor. Anything from sort of battle axes or kind of dual occupancies, all the way up to kind of some bigger projects. But one of the big challenges that I found in that stage is that it was very, very hard to get things to end up kind of positive cash flow. There were sort of active strategies that needed me to go and do a year or two of work to produce significant income and from significant kind of profit, but I needed to do that work. And I started to think about the fact that, 20, 30 years from now, I might not necessarily want to do that amount of work permanently. So I needed something that was, more cash flow oriented and less growth oriented to kind of balance the approach. So today I do kind of both. So I basically continue to do property development. I'm probably going to continue to do that for quite a long time. But I already started investing into pure cash flow properties with the view that 20 or 30 years from now, the cash flow coming from there is it's gonna be much bigger than anything else I could do in property. So
okay, makes sense. It makes sense. We don't need to get stuck on like the development side of things, because I think there's a lot of value. I think a lot of people understand the idea of like, okay, if you buy a battle axe, subdivide it, build something on the back. Now, if you build it to sell, you need to make sure you have a developer's margin built into your feasibility. If you build it to hold, it can be a very good cash flow asset. It can actually be a good asset that gives you both equity and cash flow. And it's that stage where you can really start to accelerate your journey, which is why we call it the acceleration phase.
Yeah.
But we're here to talk about rooming houses. So tell me, how does this really differ, and like, where does this fit in, and what is the main benefit? Why are you so passionate about this?
Well, listen, like I said, rooming houses has, the perfect combination of elements when you think about an ideal investment in property. It's almost like took out a pad of paper and wrote like, well, if I could imagine the ideal investment, what will it look like? And it turns out rooming houses, have most of those elements. Yeah. So the kind of rooming houses we build, they tend to have, sort of usually up to 9 bedrooms. So that means you have up to 9 different tenants, up to 9 different income streams on each of these individual properties. So that means when a tenant leaves, I hardly lose any sleep, right? It's like I almost don't care. So, well, okay, my income went down maybe 10%. The rest of the people are there. And because of the nature of these properties, they tend to be vacant for, a week, sometimes less. So that's one of the factors. The other big factor of it is they're really accessible in terms of, financing and cash flow, in the sense that, you're talking about 9 rents. Each of these rents, on a typical property might be, $200, $250 a week. So you're talking about properties that provide, $100,000 in rent a year, give or take. And that's very rare on any property, let alone on a property in this country.
Well, totally. I mean, you would associate that kind of revenue with a commercial property. So that makes me ask I'm going to ask a couple of questions about that, the finances of it. Is it classed as a commercial property?
It's the banks don't like committing sometimes to terminology. So what they call it commercial residential, which is kind of weird. Because
that is weird. Like where does it fall in? Like, okay, let me rephrase this. Commercial, you need at least the maximum is like 60 to 70% LVR, right? And so that's actually one of the barriers to entry with commercial, aside from risk and it's another conversation. Does it fall into that, or is it residential? It's like the difference between getting a 4-pack unit block and a 5-pack unit block.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question. Listen, financing is one of those things where it's probably one of the most tricky things about this strategy. So that's why it's important to kind of be around people who have done it before and kind of know what they're doing. The reality is, depending on how the property is designed, and that's one of the reasons why we design our own properties and build them from scratch rather than building something that is kind of existing stock or that is a conversion. Depending on how it is, both options are actually available. So in some instances, you might want to try to go down the residential path. That's going to allow you to do, like you said, higher LVRs, lower interest rates, but it's going to limit somewhat the way the property needs to be built, executed, some of the costs associated with it, and have a slight impact on the rent. But for some people, that path is perfect.
Is that not to get down to mechanics, but is that sort of is that like the difference between certification? Like if it's certified as like a class 1B or something like that, is it commercial? And if it's certified like what? Like is it down to that technicality and whether it's got exit signs or whether it is
listen, every rooming house needs to be a class 1B building. If you're doing a rooming house and it's not a class 1B building, you're breaking the law. And that goes into that dark place that I was talking about before. So everything needs to be that, class 1B, which again has certain requirements, like you said, around accessibility and wheelchair access and fire protection and some of those things, which again, specialist builders like us who build that sort of stuff will be all over. It's actually not a problem. It's more around the design. So let me maybe put a couple of examples. So very lately, and I guess one of my favorite ways of building some of these rooming houses is what we're calling self-contained micro apartments. So that means, inside what's legally one property, each of these rooms become little studios, little micro apartments, where they basically means that the shared facilities in the house are hardly ever used. So that means every room has its own bathroom, its own kitchenette, its own sitting area, and then obviously the kind of sleeping quarters. So you're effectively in a kind of an apartment. The problem with those is you have 9 of those. When we present it to a bank, the bank doesn't think that's a house. It cannot be rented as a house. It's a unit block. Yeah. It cannot be rented as a house. It cannot be sold as a house. If you get in trouble and foreclose on your loan, the bank cannot sell it to a family to live in. Therefore, that type of property needs to be financed from the commercial side of things. So you end up in a commercial loan. Now, that's not the only way of doing rooming houses. So we've done plenty of rooming houses that are 9 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. And that's just a big house with lots of rooms. Yeah. And some of these rooms might not be bedrooms if they don't want to. Yeah. If you're in a property or ever seen a property that has like an entertainment area or a rumpus room and a home theater area, a lot of these rooms can actually be used sort of that way, which means that, again, if the bank were to have to take possession of this property, they can just sell it to a normal family to live in, and that kind of makes it qualifies it for kind of residential lending. Now, doing residential lending means you need to have the serviceability and all that sort of stuff, and the rent that is going to be used for the assessment is a standard rent, not necessarily a rooming house rent. So all these things need to bear in mind. But both paths are open. And what we find is if people maybe don't have a lot of equity to get started, sometimes going down the residential path is preferable. Now, if someone has a little bit more equity or their serviceability is not strong, then the commercial side of these rooming houses is actually better because you're on a commercial lending.
Yeah, so they'll lend against the cash flow.
They'll lend against the cash flow, and again, you're making money out of these properties. Some of these properties make 30, 40 grand free net in your pocket every year. So that can count towards financing the project almost on its own. So.
Crikey. So it's actually one of the issues that I've seen with people who are trying to do boarding house conversions is that they take an existing residential house and then they convert it and they go, yeah, look, I've put $75,000 or whatever into converting it, but now it's accidentally become a commercial asset and
that's right.
Oh, I now have trouble financing it. And now it's become a different product. And now the bank doesn't like it. And then all of a sudden they find themselves really stuck.
No, I was going to say, and that's one of the reasons why we don't do conversions. We don't like conversions. We think conversions bring you to what we call no man's land. So you don't have a proper rooming house because it's not proper design. It's really a house with a few extra walls, but you don't have a house either. So you can't sell it as a house. You can't maximize the opportunity of having a rooming house, so you end up kind of stuck somewhere in between, which is one of the reasons why all our projects are purpose-built, purpose-designed, so that way you maximize the opportunity, but it is a rooming house. There's no way around it at the end. So if you need to sell it, not that I've seen too many rooming house for sale, people who built these assets. Don't tend to let go of them. I mean, I wouldn't let go of something that puts 30 grand on my pocket every year. But if you have to, the asset is there. Yeah.
So you mentioned cash flow a couple of times. Like, what are the kind of gross and net yields that you can expect out of this kind of thing?
Yeah. So again, the typical rooming house we build is $200 to $250 a week per rent per room. So that's somewhere between 108 and 120 grand a year kind of gross. Now, one of the things that happens with rooming houses, the expenses are higher. And I know we're going to have kind of other opportunities to go into the detail of kind of a lot of that in later trainings. But, the expenses are higher, but net in your pocket after mortgage, after expenses, after management fees, most of these projects kind of deliver somewhere between 30 and 40 grand net. So again, very different to a typical property. Even the best.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So you sort of get the stability of residential, but the cash flow of commercial.
That's right.
Wow, that's cool. Mate, that's awesome. You're like, I know
one of the reasons why I love this strategy so much, man.
Well, then what? Okay, then the obvious question is, why isn't everyone just doing it? Why aren't we doing it everywhere? Like, surely there's a limited market for it. Surely it's more than just like, well, there's just not that many stone horizons around. Surely there's Like, why aren't these more common? Is there a very limited market? What's the kind of marketing strategy? Like, why isn't there more? Why isn't there
listen, fair question. And sometimes I wonder myself, part of the reason why we went into the market with Stone Horizon is, well, we couldn't actually find anyone doing this kind of stuff for people. So we had investors around it who've done them before, and we've done them before. But it's like this secret club that, you don't kind of talk about it too much. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it. And people say, oh, no, if we build 10 of these things, then are we going to overflow the market? And I always tell to people some statistics, right? So up to last year, there were about 1,300 rooming houses in the whole of Victoria. Okay. That's a significant number, but not when you compare it to the number of other properties, which means the demand for these places is huge, particularly in tough times. In the last couple of months, our waiting list for some of these properties has doubled. Inevitably, these things get filled up very quick. So you will think, well, why people are not doing it? And I think it's a couple of reasons. The first one is, I find most Australians have an emotional connection to property in this country, right? They want to own lots of houses that are nice houses that look like their house. So a lot of people think about, well, I wouldn't live there, or I wouldn't do that. When they don't think
I see that all the time.
Yeah. They don't think as investors, right? They think they're buying a house, and they think because they bought a house before to live in, that every house they buy needs to look and feel and kind of be the same, right? That's why most people buy houses, a couple of kilometers around where they are, even though that might not necessarily be the right investment decision. So that's one reason. The other reason is there is not that many Stone Horizons around that do help people do this stuff when they don't know what to do. And again, because it's a complex strategy, it's not on people's eyes. There's, we spend a lot of time talking to the regulators and understanding what needs to happen, and on building sites, making sure that these things are built properly, they can operate kind of, not only profitably, but, with all the right regulations, and without kind of any hiccups. So and then the third factor is people think they're risky when, again, it's a bit like the whole, having a job versus doing some of the things we're doing.
I can definitely see the overlay between business thinking and property thinking in this strategy, because in order to ascertain if the idea is viable in a certain area, you need to do market research. You need to do a SWOT analysis. You need to understand who you're going to be marketing the product to, and is there a product market match? All of that kind of stuff. You couldn't just. It's kind of like if you're just going to invest in a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, you can just very easily. It's very soft landing, because you can just go, well, everyone needs houses, right?
That's right.
Everyone needs houses, right? So I'll just buy a house, and that's okay. Whereas this, because it's more complex, it actually does require you to go, okay, if I'm going to launch this product into the marketplace, can the marketplace support it? Is there an appetite in this marketplace for this product? Like anything, like if you were to launch a fitness supplement or something like that, you'd need to go, okay, who's it for? And are they there? And am I going to meet them where they are? And how am I going to let them know about it? And all of that kind of stuff. So it's fascinating. Yeah.
And listen, it's one of the reasons why we now do that sort of end-to-end thing. So we started just as a builder, right? Like I said, I own a building company, and we've been building rooming houses for a long time. Initially for us, and then eventually for kind of other investors. And we assumed that once we said to people that we were building these things, we were going to get lots of inquiries and a lot of people wanting to do this thing, but people just didn't know what to do. So that's why we kind of expanded. We went, well, we have a full team dedicated to doing this stuff and to figure out, which markets and which pockets within those markets this works. We now have, a specialist, kind of property manager that manages our properties, specialist designers that design kind of this stuff, and a full division within our building group that all they do is kind of rooming houses, with the hope that we can help more people get more freedom through investing in some of these strategies.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating because what you said there was that, you can go, hey, here's the product, but then people are like, what do I do with it? It's almost like going, I'd love to have a helicopter. And then if someone gives you a helicopter, you're like, how the fuck do I fly this thing? And it's useless. It's useless. It'll just gather rust.
Well, it's even dangerous, right? If you try to do it on your own, then you're more likely than not you're going to end up hurt.
Yeah, I'll give it a crack, and then you end up stacking it. And no. So that's quite funny. Well, mate, I'm mindful of time. I think we touched on so much good stuff here. Like, I really appreciated digging into your sort of personal development process that's actually led to this point. I see a huge amount of value in this strategy, specifically for a certain part of the portfolio. Once you've built up the requisite strength and you're looking to transition from, okay, all right, I've kind of got like a wealth base now. Like, it's so funny. You talk about property to people and everyone talks about growth. Everyone wants growth. Invest in a high growth area. Growth. Let's growth. But then you actually ask people why they want to invest in property. And it's like, to replace my income so I don't have to work. And it's like, oh, hang on a second. Do you understand that just investing for growth is not going to get you to that result?
Yeah.
And this is where I think a lot of people get tripped up. And it's one thing that I also don't agree with, like just a pure cash flow strategy, like just go and invest in tiny towns with 9% yields. I just don't think that that's a good strategy. But when you can combine these aspects of, okay, well, how can we invest in a good area but also get cash flow? Or how can we manufacture growth so that we can get cash flow? Because without growth, we can't keep moving. All of this stuff. So I really love this strategy. And look, we spoke a little bit before we got started on this podcast. And, as most of the listeners will know by now, we have a private membership site. And if you're interested in that, just head to theinvestorlab.com.au/join the community. Henry has graciously offered to, and we're going to do this in the next couple of months. We've got a bit of a backlog of trainings, but in the next couple of months, we're going to be doing a training specifically for our members on the mechanics of how this works and how to insert it as part of your overarching portfolio strategy and how you can use this as one of the key levers to get into that freedom point. And so thanks for that, Henry. I really, really appreciate it. Have you got anything you wanted to share with anyone before we wrap up?
No, really. I'm really just excited to, make this strategy available to more people, and really look forward to kind of going into more of the detail of how it works and how everything hangs together, so people can understand it. They can evaluate whether it's for them or not, and it's for them. They then can use it to, like I said, get some of that freedom. I know what it is to be chasing freedom. So I'm glad that you're helping me get the opportunity to go and chase this with more people. That's awesome. I'm incredibly thankful.
Right. I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't aligned with what we do. Like, we're not here to just help people buy houses. I've got no interest in that. What I want to do is I want to help people achieve freedom, choice, abundance. And this can help people do that. So thank you. Cool. Thanks for your time. Speak soon.
No problem.